Captain Elara Vos stood at the bridge of the Nomad, her sharp gaze fixed on the holographic map of deep space before her. The faint glow of distant stars filled the room, but it was the pulsing signal from beyond that dominated her attention. The transmission had been faint at first, nothing more than a whisper in the void, but now it was growing stronger, clearer, as though something, was reaching out from the farthest corners of the galaxy. "Captain," a voice crackled from the communications terminal. It was Lieutenant Dorian, the ship's navigator. "We've pinpointed the signal source. It's coming from the uncharted expanse. No known settlements in that sector." Ilara's jaw tightened. The uncharted expanse was a graveyard of forgotten worlds, unmapped, unexplored, and lethal. For centuries, no human had dared venture into its depths, yet here it was, an unmistakable call from the darkness. It didn't make sense. Earth had been isolated from the rest of the galaxy long ago. The last remnants of humanity had scattered across distant, inhospitable corners of space, their origin forgotten, their history buried. "Prepare a course for the expanse," Ilara commanded, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "But I need to know something, Dorian. What's the source of that signal? Is it an anomaly, or is someone out there?" Dorian hesitated, but the urgency in Ilara's tone made him respond quickly. "It's human, Captain. I've cross-referenced every known signal pattern from Earth's archives. This one matches a signal that was last recorded over 200 years ago." A chill ran down Ilara's spine. The signal wasn't a random occurrence. It was a message, a cry for help, or perhaps an invitation. She didn't know yet, but it was something she couldn't ignore. A human signal, hidden away in the deepest part of space, was a mystery she couldn't resist solving. "Full speed ahead, Lieutenant," she ordered. "We're going in." As the Nomad turned its course toward the expanse, Ilara gathered her crew in the war room. Her officers were an eclectic mix of veterans and misfits, people who had been cast away from Earth or chosen to live on the fringe of the galaxy. Together, they had formed an unbreakable bond of loyalty and survival. And now, that bond would be tested like never before. "We may be walking into a trap," Ilara began, her voice low and serious. "The expanse is a dangerous place. There are factions out there, pirates, mercenaries, alien species, who don't take kindly to human presence. But this signal, this message from our past, might hold the key to everything we've been searching for." Her second-in-command, Commander Rilke, a grizzled veteran of many skirmishes, spoke up. "You think the Dominion's involved, Captain?" Ilara paused. The Dominion, an ancient and oppressive alien empire, had been the one force that had ensured humanity's exile. Though Earth had been forgotten by most, the Dominion had not, and their reach stretched far beyond the boundaries of known space. "I don't know," Ilara said. "But if we're going to find out, we need to prepare for anything. Whatever this signal leads us to, it could change everything. We're not just going to uncover a lost colony. We might be uncovering the truth about what happened to Earth and why we were abandoned." Rilke gave a grunt of agreement, though the thought of facing the Dominion's forces again sent a shiver down his spine. "Ready the ship for entry into the expanse," Ilara ordered, and her crew dispersed, knowing the dangers they were about to face. But as the ship's engines powered up and the Nomad broke free of its orbit, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy was about to be turned upside down. The journey would be long, and the risks unimaginable, but there was no turning back. The signal had been heard, and they were going to find out what it meant. In the cold expanse of space, Earth's forgotten wanderers were about to change the galaxy. Whether for better or worse, no one could predict. And as the stars ahead blurred into the dark abyss of the expanse, Ilara Vos felt the weight of destiny pressing against her shoulders. The journey through the uncharted expanse was grueling. For weeks, the Nomad drifted through uncharted space, the quiet hum of its engines a constant reminder of the isolation that gripped its crew. The stars ahead were distant pinpricks, their light distorted by the vastness of the void. Every sensor sweep brought up nothing but emptiness. But the signal was still there, faint, persistent, like a heartbeat echoing from a forgotten world. Captain Alara Vos stood at the bridge, her eyes glued to the viewport as the barren expanse stretched before her. The crew had grown anxious, but their mission remained clear. They had to find the source of the signal, no matter the cost. "Lieutenant Dorian," she called, her voice firm. "Any change in the signal?" Dorian worked furiously at his station, his fingers flying over the console. "It's getting stronger, Captain. We're closing in on it. The source is on a planet, about 2 light-years out." Alara felt a tightening in her chest. They were close, but the further they traveled, the more dangerous things seemed to become. The expanse was known for being a desolate, lawless region, perfect for those who wanted to disappear, perfect for those who wanted to hide. "Set course for the planet. Prepare the crew for planetary descent," Alara ordered. Moments later, the ship's engines roared to life, and the Nomad broke through the boundaries of the expanse's outer reach. As they neared the planet's atmosphere, the ship's sensors detected something unexpected: artificial structures, faint but unmistakable. A city, or what was left of one. The planet was dying, its surface scorched by unknown forces, but there were signs of life, a flicker of something buried beneath the ruins. "Prepare for landing," Alara said, her tone resolute. "Rilke, gather the team. We go down in 5. Commander Rilke gave a sharp nod. "Understood, Captain." The landing was rough, as the planet's unstable atmosphere tossed the ship about. The crew held tight as the ship touched down on the cracked surface, a landscape of dead forests and twisted metal. As the doors of the ship opened, a dry, acrid wind hit them. The air was thin, and the sky was filled with the smoke of long-extinguished fires. But amid the desolation, there was a strange sense of familiarity. It wasn't long before they found the ruins, a sprawling city buried beneath layers of debris. The buildings, once tall and majestic, were now nothing more than skeletal frames. But the architecture, the design, it was unmistakable. This was human, the same as the cities they had abandoned on Earth centuries ago. "This is impossible," Rilke muttered, his voice barely audible. "No one was supposed to be here." "Someone is," Alara said, her voice hardening, "and they've been waiting for us." As they moved deeper into the ruins, they came across the remnants of what appeared to be a research facility. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dark. On a central table, scattered papers and data pads remained untouched, as though someone had left in a hurry, but not before leaving a message. Alara picked up one of the data pads and scanned the contents. Her face grew pale as she read the encrypted files. The message wasn't just a call for help, it was a warning. The humans here hadn't been abandoned. They had been erased. The Dominion had come for them, wiping out the colony and all its records. But there was more. Hidden beneath the text were coordinates, marking the location of an even more secretive facility, one that held a secret so powerful it could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. "The Dominion knows we're here," Alara said quietly, as the weight of the discovery hit her. "And they've been watching. This was no accident." "Are you suggesting they knew we would find this?" Rilke asked, disbelief in his voice. Alara nodded grimly. "Yes, this colony was never lost. It was hidden, erased by the Dominion themselves, and now we know why." As the crew explored further, it became clear that there was much more at play here than a simple colony's fall. The Dominion hadn't just exiled humanity, they had sought to wipe every trace of Earth from the galaxy's memory. And now, the Pilgrims were standing on the threshold of a secret that could change everything. The discovery of the hidden facility was just the beginning. Alara could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, and with it came the realization that the galaxy had been shaped by lies. The question was no longer about survival, it was about truth. The truth that Earth had been more than just a forgotten planet. It had been the key, and now the Pilgrims were the only ones who could unlock it. But the Dominion would stop at nothing to ensure that they never did. "Rilke," Alara said, her voice steady but filled with resolve, "we have to find this facility. And we have to do it before they do." But as they moved to leave the ruins, a soft but unmistakable sound echoed through the air, footsteps, and it wasn't just the wind. The Pilgrims were not alone. The sound of footsteps grew louder, reverberating off the crumbling walls of the ancient facility. Ilara's hand instinctively went to her sidearm as she signaled to her crew to fall into a defensive formation. Rilke, his eyes scanning the darkened corridors, motioned for the team to spread out. The ruins were eerily quiet, but the distinct presence of something or someone out there sent a ripple of tension through the group. "Stay sharp," Ilara whispered, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. The Dominion had not left their marks here by accident. Someone had to be watching them, waiting for the exact moment they uncovered the truth. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared move, but Ilara could feel the oppressive weight of something unseen, lurking in the shadows. Her crew exchanged cautious glances, knowing full well the dangers that surrounded them. The Dominion's agents were experts in covert operations, able to strike from the darkness without a sound. Without warning, a figure stepped into the faint glow of the facility's dying lights. Ilara's breath hitched as she recognized the figure, a woman clad in the black, tactical armor of the Dominion's elite special forces. Her helmet was off, revealing sharp, angular features, her eyes cold and calculating. The scars on her face spoke of a long history of battle, but it was her presence that unsettled Ilara the most. This woman had been waiting. "I knew you'd come," the woman said, her voice low and measured, almost too calm for the situation. "I hoped you would. Who are you?" Ilara demanded, her hand tightening on her weapon. "Why are you here?" The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if she had expected the question but wasn't sure how to answer it. Finally, she spoke again, her tone heavy with irony. "I am the last of the Dominion's watchful eyes. I was sent here to ensure nothing of importance ever escaped these ruins." The crew tensed. The Dominion had left its mark on Earth centuries ago, but Ilara had always assumed they'd moved on, leaving humanity to rebuild itself in exile. This woman's presence proved otherwise. "The Dominion?" Rilke growled, stepping forward. "What are you hiding here? Why erase the Pilgrims? Why erase Earth?" The woman's lips curled into a faint smile. "You think you're the first to search for the truth? You think the Dominion hasn't seen your kind before?" She took a step forward, her posture casual yet dangerous. "You're not the first to stumble upon the secrets buried here. The truth is, everything you know, everything you believe about Earth, about your past, it's a lie." Ilara's mind raced. The words were familiar, too familiar. Everything she had uncovered on this planet, everything her crew had found in the ruins, hinted at something far larger than the Dominion's conspiracy. What the woman had just said confirmed it. The signal, the erased history, the hidden facility, it all pointed to one undeniable fact. Earth was more than just a lost planet. It had been the key to the galaxy's balance, and the Dominion had been intent on erasing all traces of it. "What are you talking about?" Ilara asked, her voice growing more urgent. "What do you mean by a lie?" The woman's eyes darkened, and for the briefest moment, Ilara saw a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or something more personal, before the cold, calculated expression returned. "You're asking the wrong questions, Captain. The question isn't why we erased Earth, it's why you're still here." Ilara's confusion deepened, but before she could respond, the woman's hand moved swiftly to her side, drawing a small, sleek device from a hidden pocket. The air around them shimmered, and the ground beneath their feet hummed with a faint energy. A high-pitched whine filled the space, followed by a sudden jolt of electricity that ran through the walls. Ilara and her team barely had time to react as the facility's emergency lights flickered on, revealing a new and terrifying reality. Behind the woman, a series of metal doors slid open, revealing rows of cryogenic pods, each one containing a human figure suspended in stasis. The woman's eyes gleamed with something cold, almost predatory. "Earth didn't just send out a signal, Captain," she said, her voice chilling. "You were never the first to search for the truth, and you certainly won't be the last. These are the forgotten ones, our last generation, frozen in time, waiting to return." Ilara's blood ran cold as the truth sank in. The humans in the pods were not relics of a lost colony. They were the survivors of a humanity that had been erased, hidden away by the Dominion. The truth had been buried, not in history, but in time itself. "We didn't just erase Earth's past, Captain," the woman continued, stepping aside to reveal more pods. "We buried humanity's future, and you've just uncovered it." Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of her discovery grew heavier. The Pilgrims were no longer just searching for their past. They had uncovered the very essence of what the Dominion had feared: the return of humanity's true legacy. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, and now neither did Ilara's crew. But they would soon find out. The silence in the facility was deafening, broken only by the low hum of machinery keeping the cryogenic pods alive. Ilara stared at the rows of frozen humans, suspended in time, each one encased in a transparent shell, their features pale and still. It was a sight that sent a chill through her bones, a stark reminder that the galaxy had been hiding something much more dangerous than a forgotten history. The woman, Dominion, or whatever she was now, smiled coldly at Ilara's shock. "You see, Captain, these aren't just survivors. These are the last of Earth's true children, frozen and waiting to be reawakened. They were put into stasis centuries ago, before the Dominion decided that humanity had become too dangerous." Ilara could hardly breathe. She had been under the impression that humanity had been scattered to the far reaches of the galaxy, surviving in exile. But this was a truth that shattered everything she thought she knew. The Dominion had not just erased Earth, they had frozen its people, ensuring that no one would rise to challenge their rule. But why? Why keep them frozen? Ilara asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Why not just kill them? The woman's gaze hardened, because the Dominion knew that Earth wasn't just another planet. It was a symbol, a rallying point for rebellion. They knew that if the true humans returned, they would rekindle a fire that the galaxy couldn't extinguish. So they froze the best and brightest, kept them dormant, so they could never rise up. Ilara's mind raced. This wasn't just a hidden past, it was a ticking time bomb. These humans, these forgotten pilgrims, were a weapon waiting to be unleashed. Rilke stepped forward, his voice low but laced with anger. "How long has this been going on? How many others like this are there?" The woman's smile faded, her eyes turning cold. "This is the last batch, the final generation. After this, the Dominion will have wiped out all traces of Earth's potential." She glanced back at the pods, a flicker of something unspoken crossing her features, before she turned back to the group. "You've uncovered their plan, Captain. But now you need to decide what to do with them." Ilara's stomach churned. The decision was not one she was prepared for. The truth was clear. The Dominion had erased humanity's future in an effort to keep their control over the galaxy. And now the Pilgrims had stumbled onto this dark secret. But what now? These people had been dormant for so long. Were they even capable of leading humanity back from the brink? Can they be awakened? Ilara asked, her voice barely a whisper. The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, but it will not be easy. The cryogenic process wasn't perfect. There are risks, memory loss, instability, psychological trauma, but it's the only way. If you want humanity's future to stand a chance, you'll need to wake them. But the Dominion will come for you, and they'll do anything to ensure this project stays buried. Alara exchanged a glance with Rilke, who stood with his arms crossed, contemplating the decision. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The fate of humanity was in her hands. What she did next would echo throughout the galaxy. "We'll wake them," Alara said, her voice firm. "We don't have any choice. If humanity is going to survive, we have to unite. We have to show the galaxy that Earth will not be forgotten." The woman's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Then you better get ready, Captain. The moment you activate those pods, the Dominion will know, and they'll come with everything they have to stop you." Alara nodded, her resolve strengthening. "We've made it this far. We'll fight. We're not running anymore." Without another word, she turned to Rilke. "Prepare the activation sequence. We're waking them." As Rilke moved to the console to initiate the sequence, Alara walked toward the first pod, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the cold surface. She wasn't just about to awaken sleeping humans. She was about to resurrect a lost era, one that could change the course of the galaxy. The machine whirred to life, and the pods slowly began to hum with power. The glass surfaces of the first pod cracked open, the faint hiss of released air signaling the beginning of something monumental. Slowly, the occupant inside began to stir, a young man, his features pale but unaged, as though he had only been asleep for a moment rather than centuries. The man's eyes fluttered open, his gaze sharp and disoriented. He blinked, trying to adjust to the dim light of the facility, before his gaze focused on Alara. There was no recognition, just confusion and fear. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse, the weight of his long sleep evident in his words. Alara smiled softly, the first hint of warmth in her eyes since they'd arrived on this forsaken world. "You're not alone anymore," she said. "You're home." As the man processed her words, Alara could feel the first spark of hope ignite within her. The future of humanity was awakening, and with it, the fight against the Dominion had only just begun. The man's eyes flickered in confusion as he slowly sat up in the pod, his hand gripping the cold edges of the stasis chamber as though he was trying to hold onto some semblance of reality. Alara couldn't help but notice the dazed look in his eyes, the bewilderment of someone who had not only lost time but was awakening to a world far different from the one they had known. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. "You're on Earth," Alara answered gently, her tone calm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "You were in stasis, waiting to be awakened." The man looked around, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the strange old machinery and the half-darkened space. The rows of cryogenic pods, some still sealed, others now beginning to open, seemed to overwhelm him. His breath quickened as he stood up unsteadily, his legs unaccustomed to movement after such a long dormancy. "Earth?" he repeated, his voice sounding both confused and incredulous. "I thought Earth was lost, a myth." Alara's heart sank as she realized how much had been forgotten during the centuries of exile. To this man, Earth was no more than a story, a fable whispered by survivors in distant corners of the galaxy. He had never known the world as she did, the cradle of humanity, now a shadow of its former glory. "Yes," Alara said, a quiet strength in her words. "Earth is real, and we've come to reclaim it. But we need your help." The man looked up at her, eyes narrowing in skepticism. He stepped out of the pod, his body stiff but gaining strength with each passing moment. "Help with what? What's happened to us? To Earth?" The air seemed to thicken with the weight of the question. Alara glanced toward the console where Rilke was busy activating the next pod. She could feel the eyes of her crew on her, silently urging her to make him understand. "Earth was erased," she began, choosing her words carefully, "by the Dominion. They froze humanity's future to prevent us from rising up, to keep us from ever challenging their rule." The man's brow furrowed, as if trying to comprehend the magnitude of what she was saying. The Dominion? You mean they're still here? They're out there, Ilara confirmed, and they'll stop at nothing to keep humanity from rising again. That's why we need you. You're part of something much bigger than any of us. You? She hesitated, her voice almost breaking. You're the future of humanity. The man fell silent, his gaze drifting to the other pods. Ilara could see his mind working, piecing together the truth of what had been hidden from him. Slowly, the confusion in his eyes gave way to something else, resolve, maybe even anger. I don't remember much, he muttered, his voice distant. But I know one thing, we can't let them win. Ilara nodded, her heart swelling with pride. For a moment, the years of struggle, the pain of loss, and the fear of the unknown seemed to melt away. Here, in this ancient facility, humanity was taking its first step toward reclaiming its rightful place in the galaxy. Your name? She asked softly. The man paused, as if the question caught him off guard. Zarek, he said after a moment, a hint of clarity in his voice. Zarek Althar. Ilara extended her hand. Welcome back, Zarek. You're not alone anymore. We're going to fight together. As Zarek grasped her hand, a sudden alarm blared from the console behind them. The facility's systems, which had been dormant for centuries, were now fully awake, and the alarms were a warning. The Dominion had detected the awakening. We've triggered something. Rilke shouted over the noise, his eyes wide with concern. They're coming. We need to move now. Ilara's mind raced. The time for questions and introductions was over. The Dominion would waste no time in tracking them down, and they had to be prepared. Zarek looked to Ilara, his expression shifting from uncertainty to grim determination. We need to get to the surface, Zarek said, his voice steady now. If we can reach the communication beacon, we might be able to send a signal to the others. Let them know Earth is alive. Ilara nodded, rallying her crew. We move now. Rilke, take point. Zarek, you're with me. As they quickly made their way through the decaying hallways of the facility, Ilara could feel the weight of the moment pushing down on her. The future of humanity, of Earth, was no longer a myth. It was a reality, and it was about to be thrust into a battle for survival. They reached the surface, the first rays of the alien sun casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The wind howled, but there was a sharp clarity to it now, a reminder of what was at stake. Get to the beacon. Ilara shouted, leading the way toward a rusted communications tower that had once sent out signals to a distant, unknown galaxy. As Zarek and the others followed closely behind, Ilara's mind stayed focused on the task at hand. This was it. The fight for humanity's future had begun, and it would not be stopped. Not by the Dominion, not by time, and certainly not by the shadows of the past. The storm was awakening, and they were ready to face it head-on. The wind howled as Ilara and her team sprinted toward the crumbling communications tower, the rusted metal frame standing stark against the orange-tinted sky. The air was thick with dust, the ground beneath their boots giving way to the uneven surface of Earth's forgotten surface. It had been centuries since anyone had set foot here, and the harsh, alien landscape was both a graveyard and a battleground. The alarms were growing louder now, echoing in the distance, signaling the Dominion's response. The sudden spike in activity at the facility had been detected, and they were coming, faster than Ilara had anticipated. Her pulse quickened as she glanced back to ensure the others were keeping up. Zarek, despite his disorientation from waking up in an entirely new world, kept pace with Rilke. The two men were focused, determined as if the stakes had already become clear. Ilara, Rilke called out as they neared the tower. We need to get this beacon operational and fast. They'll be on us within minutes. She nodded grimly, her eyes scanning the area. The comms tower, once a symbol of humanity's reach into the stars, was now a rusted relic of a bygone era. The flickering lights from its long dormant systems seemed almost mocking in their fragility. But Alara wasn't about to let their last hope fall apart now. "We'll get it working," she said, her voice low but firm. "Get inside. We'll make it happen." The crew rushed into the tower, and Alara immediately went to the central control panel, her hands flying over the ancient buttons and switches. The console flickered to life under her touch, the static hum of power pulsing through the old machinery. The system was archaic, a far cry from the advanced technologies that had evolved across the galaxy, but it still held a sliver of the same potential. Zarek joined her, his brow furrowed as he studied the worn-down interface. "I can't believe this is the equipment we're relying on to send a signal. Are we even going to make it work?" "We don't have a choice," Alara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to reach any ships, any colonies, any factions that can hear us. Earth needs to know we're alive." She knew the odds weren't in their favor. The Dominion would be able to track their signal. The moment the tower began broadcasting, they would know exactly where to find them. But they had no other option. Time was running out, and the window for their survival was closing fast. Rilke and the others spread out, checking for incoming Dominion forces. Their eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert to any signs of movement. The sounds of distant engines, low and ominous, vibrated through the air, a reminder of just how close the Dominion was. "Status?" Alara called to Rilke, who was peering through a cracked window in the tower's upper level. "They're almost here," he reported, his voice sharp with urgency. "A small fleet. It won't take them long to figure out what we're doing." Zarek turned to Alara, his face pale but resolute. "We won't make it out of here alive if we wait. But you're right, we can't just let Earth remain a forgotten world. We have to fight." "I know," Alara said, eyes locking with his. "But we need the signal to go out. If we can just make it past their blockade, even if it's just a faint whisper into the galaxy, it'll be enough." The hum of the tower systems grew louder, and Alara could feel the old machinery awakening, piece by piece. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. The comms array was coming online, the ancient circuitry sparking to life as if it, too, had a final message to send before it was lost forever. "Almost there," Alara said, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. "This should work. Just a few more seconds." A deafening roar echoed through the tower's exterior, and a violent shockwave rattled the walls. Ilara's heart skipped a beat as she felt the tower tremble beneath her feet. The Dominion had arrived. "Get down," Rilke shouted, pulling Alara away from the control panel as a blast rocked the tower. The outer walls cracked, and debris rained down from above. Ilara's pulse raced as she fought to maintain her balance. She could hear the heavy footsteps of Dominion soldiers approaching. The sound of their armored boots against the rubble sent a shiver down her spine. "Signals out," Zarek called from across the room, his face lit by the faint glow of the console's final transmission. "It's gone." The room fell deathly silent as the transmission completed. Alara looked toward Zarek, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. They had done it. But it had come at a cost. The Dominion was at their doorstep. "We've done our part," Alara said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "Now we fight." Rilke quickly checked his weapon, preparing for the fight ahead. "We've got one shot at this. We hold the line as long as we can." Alara nodded. This was it. The last stand for Earth had begun. The final echo of humanity was now out there, broadcasting through the stars, and the Dominion would hear it. The vibrations from the Dominion's approaching fleet shook the floor beneath Alara's feet as the echoing clang of their boots grew nearer. Every fiber of her being screamed for action, but she knew they had precious little time. The comms beacon had sent out its message. Earth was not a myth, and humanity was not finished. Now they had to hold off the Dominion long enough to make that message count. The sound of crashing metal and a sharp, high-pitched hum filled the air as the Dominion soldiers closed in on the tower. Alara's pulse raced as she scanned the room, eyes quickly falling on Zarek, who stood by the cracked window, his face grim but determined. "They'll be here any second," Zarek muttered. "We've got no choice but to fight." Alara gave him a nod, her hand gripping her weapon tightly. It wasn't much, a makeshift pulse rifle scavenged from the wreckage of an old Dominion warship, but it was all they had. "We don't need to win," she said, her voice steady. "We just need to buy time. Long enough for reinforcements to hear the signal." Rilke, stationed near the door with his own rifle, smirked despite the gravity of the situation. "Well, we're going to need a damn good fight to do that." The tower's outer doors exploded in a burst of blue-white energy as the Dominion soldiers arrived, their weapons drawn and ready. Alara's heart stopped for a moment, then surged with adrenaline. They were outnumbered, but they weren't going down without a fight. She motioned to her team, and they quickly took their positions, Zarek covering the left flank, Rilke at the entrance, and Alara herself near the control panel, ready to defend it with her life. The first wave of Dominion soldiers surged through the door, their armored suits reflecting the dim light of the ruined tower. The soldiers were efficient, calculating, but they hadn't anticipated the ferocity of humanity's will to survive. Rilke fired first, his weapon's pulse blinding in the darkened tower as he took down 2 soldiers with precision shots. The flashes of energy lit up the room, and Alara felt a surge of hope. If Rilke could do that, then maybe they had a chance. Zarek's pulse rifle whined as he fired, his shots taking out one soldier after another with deadly accuracy. The man might have lost his memory, but his instincts were still sharp. He moved with military precision, a warrior reborn. The sound of weapons fire filled the air, drowning out everything but the violence unfolding before them. Alara's mind raced, running over the plan they had discussed. They had to hold their ground, just long enough for reinforcements to hear the signal and come to their aid. But the Dominion was relentless. More soldiers poured into the tower, their numbers overwhelming. "Keep them back," Rilke shouted, unloading another round of energy blasts into the advancing Dominion troops. Alara's hands trembled as she fired her own weapon, each shot landing with a satisfying thud, but the enemy's ranks seemed to never thin. The Dominion soldiers were disciplined, well-equipped, and relentless, but Earth's warriors, despite their primitive weapons, fought with a ferocity that surprised even them. Zarek was the first to notice the Dominion's change in tactics. "They're flanking us," he shouted, spinning around just as a new wave of soldiers stormed through the tower's rear entrance. The battle inside the tower grew more chaotic. Alara gritted her teeth and sprinted toward the rear exit, using the brief moments of distraction caused by her team's fire to get behind the soldiers. She dropped to the ground, taking aim with the makeshift pulse rifle. 1 shot, 2, then 3. The soldiers fell, but there were too many. They were closing in from every direction. "Alara," Rilke's voice cut through the noise, sharp with urgency. "They've got us surrounded. We need to retreat." But retreat wasn't an option. If they retreated now, the Dominion would capture the tower, and the signal would be silenced forever. "We fight," Alara said, her voice quiet but fierce. "We hold them back." Zarek, panting heavily but standing firm, looked at her. "You're right, we'll hold." With renewed determination, Alara motioned for them to reposition. They had to protect the beacon at all costs. The Dominion soldiers were closing in, but for a brief moment, Alara saw something in the distance, a flicker of movement, a ship appearing on the horizon. "Look," she shouted, pointing toward the sky. "Reinforcements are coming." The distant ship, a glimmering speck of hope, grew larger as it approached, its engines flaring to life. It was too far away to be of immediate help, but it was a sign that their message had been heard. "Hold the line," Alara shouted, her voice shaking with the realization that their fight was far from over. The Dominion soldiers hesitated, momentarily distracted by the incoming threat. But Alara knew it wouldn't be long before they realized the reinforcement ship wouldn't make it in time. It was their last stand, and it would be a brutal one. Rilke stepped forward, his eyes hard as stone. "We're not letting them take Earth. Not today." The fire of humanity's resilience burned bright, and for the first time in years, Alara felt hope rise in her chest. Despite the odds, they weren't giving up. Earth wasn't going to be forgotten. Not today. The battle raged on. The battle was chaos, pure and unrelenting. Alara's heart pounded in her chest as she fought with everything she had left. The Dominion soldiers pressed in from every direction, their numbers overwhelming. But despite their superior firepower, there was something the Dominion couldn't understand: humanity's refusal to back down. Earth's survivors, though battered and scared, fought with a desperation and defiance that echoed across the battlefield. Zarek's pulse rifle blazed, cutting down enemy after enemy, while Rilke's calculated shots picked off targets with deadly precision. But even their skilled marksmanship couldn't halt the tide of Dominion forces. They were surrounded. The room, once filled with the promise of hope, was now a battleground where only the desperate clung to survival. "Alara!" Rilke shouted, ducking behind a pillar to reload. "The ship's too far. We need to fight them off now, or we'll never make it." "I know," she called back, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. "Just hold on. We have to keep the beacon active." She turned to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys as she fought to maintain the transmission. Her mind was a blur of calculations, trying to keep the system online while the world around her seemed to fall apart. The Dominion was closing in on the tower, but Alara refused to let them take this final piece of humanity's fight. A blast of energy rocked the room, and she staggered, barely keeping her footing as the floor beneath her cracked. Shattered glass rained down, and dust filled the air. She glanced toward the control panel, her pulse quickening. The signal was flickering, weakening. "No! Keep them off me!" Alara shouted, her voice hoarse. "I'm almost there." Rilke and Zarek immediately sprang into action, providing cover as the Dominion pushed forward. The air was thick with smoke and fire as they fought, their backs pressed against the walls and their weapons a blur of light in the darkness. But the Dominion was relentless. With every passing minute, their hope of survival seemed to shrink, but Alara wouldn't let them falter. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the rear wall of the tower. The Dominion had breached their last line of defense. A group of heavily armored soldiers stormed into the room, weapons raised, their cold, calculating eyes locked on Alara. But then, the distant hum of an engine grew louder, growing steadily in volume until the unmistakable roar of a ship's thrusters filled the air. It was coming. The ship, the reinforcements they had hoped for, was almost within range. "Alara!" Zarek shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "It's coming, but you have to finish it now." Alara's hands flew across the control panel, her fingers dancing over the old keys. She could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure building with each passing second. The Dominion was closing in, but she could hear the ship now, so close. Her breath hitched. There, the transmission line flickered and then stabilized. The beacon was back online, the message strong and clear. "This is Earth." Alara's voice rang out through the comms, breaking the tension. "We are alive. We are humanity. We are not forgotten." The message echoed, traveling across the stars, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Alara's heart pounded as she watched the signal leave, her eyes briefly closing in relief. They had done it. They had delivered humanity's message. A loud crash snapped her back to reality. The Dominion soldiers were upon them, and their time was up. There was no escape. But just as all hope seemed lost, the ship emerged from the clouds, a sleek vessel cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. It was massive, its engines roaring as it descended rapidly toward the tower. The Dominion soldiers hesitated, unsure of the new threat. The ship opened fire. Energy blasts surged toward the Dominion forces, tearing through their ranks. The soldiers were caught off guard, unable to react in time. The tide of battle began to turn. "Get to the ship!" Rilke yelled, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. "Now!" Ilara didn't hesitate. She grabbed Zorek's arm and pulled him toward the exit. The sound of the Dominion forces retreating in disarray filled the air as the ship's weapons cut through their ranks, clearing a path. The crew raced toward the ship, the roar of the engines growing louder. Ilara could feel the heat of the ship's thrusters as they reached the landing ramp. Rilke and Zarek were right behind her, their weapons still drawn as they boarded the ship. As the ramp closed behind them, Ilara allowed herself a moment to breathe. The ship's interior was a blur of high-tech equipment and advanced systems, but none of that mattered now. They had made it. They had survived. The ship's captain, a grizzled veteran named Kayla, looked at them with a grim smile. "You did it," she said. "We heard the signal. You've given us a chance." Ilara's chest swelled with pride. "We didn't give up," she said quietly, looking out the viewport as Earth receded into the distance. "And neither will humanity." The stars ahead of them seemed to shimmer with new possibilities, a future not yet written but full of hope. Humanity's voice had been heard across the galaxy. The forgotten Pilgrims had sparked the beginning of a new era, one where Earth's wanderers would lead the charge toward reclaiming their place among the stars. And this time, they would not be forgotten.